All right, so we are about 4 minutes past 12, so I'll just go ahead and get this going. I'll also get the screen share going for the presentation that we have. But yeah, welcome to Crash Course of Time. This is your first time here, which I know it's not Brooke's first time here, but if it's your first time watching this recording, I'm happy that you're here and I'm happy that you can get this information. So we'll jump right on into our kind of intro, like what is Crash Course of Climb, right? So Crash Course of Climb is just sort of this presentation series where we talk about climbing, kind of give you an orientation to just what climbing is, whether it's the history, the technical stuff, or just some of what you do in climbing. And it's going to be every Tuesday at 12 p.m. I still have it as an updated time because if you have watched some of the other recordings, I previously called this Friday Night Climbs, and it was at 6 p.m. on Friday evenings. But we've changed that time for ease of my watching and then ease of hopefully people coming in to watch it as well. So that's going to be every Tuesday at 12 p.m. for basically the entire semester. It's going to be presented primarily by myself, Josh Leyland. I'm the climbing tower lead at UCF, and every now and then I might ask another tower attendant who works there as well to present something if they're feeling it. So far, it's just been me, though. So each week there's going to be a fixed topic that we're going to be talking about. So like I think previously we started off with difficulty ratings, then we went into modes of climbing, and then we've talked about knots and stuff. And today we'll be talking about something entirely different. So it's going to change every single week. They're mostly going to be kind of instruction and discussion based. I usually hope, that we have people around to ask questions and kind of talk about things if we can. And then occasionally, like last week when we were doing knot tying, it was more instructional. So kind of showing you how to do something. And then you can also ask questions there. So that's kind of the format of it. That's the timing of it. And that's what Crash Course of Climb is. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and dive into this week's topic, which is the Sender's Guide to Belay Technology. So we've kind of talked generally about rope climbing and just all the modes of climbing already, but we haven't really dived into specifics at all yet, especially with belaying, which is a humongously integral part of rope climbing. You can't climb on a rope without a belayer or some sort of secure belay. Otherwise, you fall and you injure yourself or something worse. So belaying is super important. It's just like, it's one of those things that you learn. It's like the first thing you learn for rope climbing. So we're not going to today talk about how to belay necessarily. That you can also learn how to do at the tower when we open back up, or most facilities that have ropes that have some sort of belay class. So I advise taking those. So we won't be talking about that today, but rather the technology that goes into it, how it works, and just kind of all the stuff you can look at. Because if you look at this picture here, there's a lot of devices on there. They all look super weird. It's like a rainbow of just random pieces. Like how do they work, what they do. We're going to talk about, a lot of that stuff in that picture. Actually, I have a couple examples with me, some things that are kind of neat. And we'll just kind of differentiate them and talk about why they work the way they do. So yeah, we're going to go straight on into it. Now, first, I want to go ahead and define what is belaying. I understand that some of the people watching this may not even, have belayed before. So I want to kind of address, what is belaying, what's the history of it, that sort of thing. So if we look it up on Google, which is what I did to get this picture, you find that it can be a verb. So it's to fix a running rope, ideally, around a cleat, rock, pin, or other object to secure it. In our case, we're fixing it around a belay device, right? So we're trying to secure a rope somehow. It also might mean if you're saying like belay this, belay that order, perhaps. That's what I have on the right side of this page. That means stop or enough. So the word belay kind of came from, nautical terminology way back when. You think of, again, someone yelling, belay that order, belay that, Mr. Man your post, that sort of thing. That's where you kind of hear the word belay. So hearing it in climbing kind of feels different, but it really does mean the same thing. It can also be, used as a noun as well. So someone might say, hey, give me a belay. That just might mean, hey, come and belay me, give me the act of belaying, that sort of thing. So really what it's doing in terms of climbing, I think it's the next page, yeah. What it's doing in terms of climbing is you're trying to stop the movement of rope when you want to, when someone's climbing. So really it's the action of employing techniques which prevent movement of the rope through a fixed anchor. So that anchor could be your belay device, that could be a physical anchor, some sort of connection to the wall where the rope's running through a system of some sort. I'm not going to get specific with what that system is. It could be a number of different things. And then a belayer is someone who tracks that progress. They belay, they stop the rope when they need it to. Really, so the reason we're doing it is if climbers climbing on a rope, and whether it's lead climbing as we talked about in the past or top rope climbing, it doesn't really matter. Either way, if they fall, the idea is that the climber falls and the belayer will catch them, stop that fall, belay that movement is the idea. And then the last point I have there is that if the climber finish climbing, the belayer also is going to lower them safely. So really what the belay device is doing, what the belayer is doing, is controlling the movement, I guess the vertical, movement of the climber to a degree. The climber's climbing on their own, they're doing what they can, but the belayer is, keeping them secure, providing the protection that they need for when they want to lower down, or if they fall, they're going to catch them. So that's really the gist of what belaying is. It's pretty general. Without the devices in the mix, that's really all it is. It's just controlling that vertical movement, catching the climber when they fall, and then lowering them, capturing their progress as they go up, that sort of thing. Sweet. You have anything to add, Brooke? Sweet. We're going to go into a small history of belaying and talk about kind of how it just built up, starting like before the 60s up to the 60s or so, and then going forward from how it went on there. So if you look way back, the first thing you would have seen is a hand belay, which nowadays is scary, terrifying. No one's going to be doing this. So what people had back in the day was rope and hiking boots. They might not even had harnesses when they were doing this. And they would just tie a loop around their waist, and then they'd start climbing, and then the person on the ground would just kind of hold on to the rope. Not exactly like how you see in that picture. I just got a picture of someone holding a rope, basically. But really what they're doing is they would be kind of, just holding onto the rope and torquing the rope and twisting it to kind of get a better grip on it, wearing gloves, of course, too. And if someone fell, they would literally just hold their weight by holding onto the rope with their bare hands. So obviously you could think if they let go with their bare hands, they're just going to immediately fall because there's nothing stopping that rope from running through whatever it's running through on the wall up there. So this is very minimal. This is back when there wasn't the technology like belay devices. And, this is kind of the first form of people trying to secure people as they go up a rope. So again, like I said, you're not really going to be seeing this today. That torque that you use in your hands is creating a sense of security, as I put in little quote marks there. It's not really that secure at all. But yeah, you won't see anyone doing this. If you do, then it's time to suggest that they use a belay device or some other method, because that's just not really an acceptable practice these days. But I mean, that's where we started. That's how belaying kind of started out. And then people started to notice, like, hey, my hands hurt, or hey, this person's fallen. These crazy accidents keep happening. We need to do something about our security here. And that's how we start moving into some of the other devices that we see. So the next best thing that we get after the hand belay is the hip belay. So getting into like the 70s and I guess late 60s or so, they started, trying to get some extra friction, a little bit more security. This picture's a little blurry, but it does get the gist of it. So basically you have the brake hand and the guide hand. So what they would do is they would wrap it around their body. So I'll turn this down just a little bit. And, pretty much like say this is the brake strand and this is going to the climber. They're just going to be taking in rope and then pulling their hand up and just letting that go around their hips as they go. In the event that a climber falls, they would just kind of push it over to their side to get maximum friction around their hips. And then their body is still holding it, right? So it's better than a hand belay because you have a lot more friction with the surface area of your hips. And, you're not putting as much of that directly on your hands, but that's still like a pretty, it can be a little bit insecure. You want to be lower to the ground. There's a chance it could slip under your butt or slip up to your armpits and then kind of pinch your ribs. Better, but not fantastic is kind of what it was. So depending on the application, you actually might see people actually still using this technique today. It's mainly going to be alpinists for speed, right? So to take a rope and put it around your hips is going to be faster than setting up a belay device, perhaps, yeah? So you'll only see people really using this on routes where the climber is super, super sure that they're not going to fall. Like it's basically without a shadow of doubt in their mind, they're going to not fall. But, you still want to have that just in case protection. So the belayer might quickly throw on that hip belay just to, have that peace of mind while they go up, something that's, easy, but still technically treacherous terrain. So yeah, mostly obsolete, but it does have its time and place. And again, that's kind of what you found still before belay devices, but better than that hand belay for sure. So yeah. The next thing I actually clicked on was the Munter hitch. So this one's actually pretty largely used today for different applications, again, kind of for speed. So as you can see there, it is literally, it's a hitch. Like it's an actual hitch. We talked last week about knots and hitches, and this is a great one for climbing. What this does is the rope runs through that knot. Like it can actually physically run through. And I'll go ahead and tie one real quick just so I can have a visual of it kind of moving around. But you can use that for either top rope belay, or if someone's climbing up to you, then you can use that as well. That's in the first picture, that would be if someone was climbing up to that point. And that second picture is if the belayer is on the ground, just belaying someone who's top roping or lead climbing. Now, this works pretty dang well, actually. It uses the rope's friction on itself to, give you a little bit of security, so that way your hand doesn't have to hold quite as much of that weight. Yeah, that's just kind of how it works. So if I have the muncher looking like this, you'll know that there's, the two strands are going down. If I pull on this strand, you'll see that the rope is going to run through itself, and it's going to, rub and rub, which means that holding onto it with this hand is going to make it pretty easy to hold on to, right, if it gets pulled. Now, this is kind of a funky knot. If you pull it from the other end, it actually does flip over and change sides. So in the event of a fall, it's possible that the rope, the knot will flip over and kind of feel like a pop on the rope, but it's still tied, it's still working. It just has two directions, basically. If I flip it over again, it'll go that way. I can pull the rope from that side. If I pull the rope from the other side, it'll flip over, and then I can pull the rope through. So kind of a funky little knot. This works pretty well as a belay device, but this really isn't something that you may want to sub out for, like, say, if you don't want to buy a belay device, you don't want to spend the $10, $20, $30, whatever it is. You just say, I want to use my rope. That's fine. It's just when you have the friction of the rope rubbing over itself like that, you're going to have increased wear on your rope. It's going to get fuzzy faster. Might kink your rope up, make it kind of twisty. So it's not the most convenient option, but it works very, very well. It provides quite a lot of security. It's low gear. It's fast. And that's why people use it. And like changed in how you belayed going after the hand belay and the hip belay. This was nice, secure. You're not putting any wear on your body finally. Like, you're not getting these black marks on your hips, not getting these torn up hands. Really kind of a cool thing. So yeah, this again also starts to put hardware into the mix. So now we have a carabiner. We're not using just our body. We actually have a piece of gear involved now. So from here on forward, we're going to be talking about belay devices that are using carabiners and actual devices and complicated stuff like that, right? So yeah, we're going to talk about belay devices. Before we talk about the actual devices, I wanted to kind of break them down into their categories, because there's several types of belay devices. That first picture we saw with all those, different colorful devices, that was a pretty good spray of all these things. And there's even more devices than that. Like, every company has like 3 or 4 or 5, maybe even different types of devices that they put out. And they all fall into these categories for the most part. So the first thing you'll see there is tube style. So that's going to be assuming that if you look into a device, it has like this cross-sectional appearance of like a tube. So it's pretty much like just like a circular ovular space that you can run through, and it's a tube. Then you also have assisted braking. So there's 2 styles of assisted braking I have listed here. That's going to be passive / geometric. That's just kind of the same type of term, I guess, or active and mechanical, right? So if you think of, well, I guess first of all, assisted braking, what it's going to do is it's going to take some of the weight off of your hands, right? It may not take all of the weight off, and it does not mean that you are allowed to take your hand off ever on a belay device. That's just kind of a rule. But assisted braking is going to help you hold on to that rope even easier, so that way there's less strain on your hands and a little bit more security, right? So whether that's passive, which means that there's no moving parts, but the device itself, cinches or shifts the entire device to a point where it can hold the rope better, or whether that's active, where there are moving parts, cams or little hinges that grab the rope, moving parts. That's a little bit more complicated, but they tend to be a little bit more secure. So we can talk about the categories, but it's a lot better to go ahead and just kind of look at them. It makes it a lot easier to imagine, right? So as I said, there's a crap load of devices, so many different things. And I do have a few examples to kind of go over. So the most basic is going to be your tube style. Right there it says unassisted. What that means is that, it's not like you have friction in the device, sure, but the device itself is not going to shift or do anything to add anything extra onto what you're doing to brake on the device. So what we have in that first row there on the tube style unassisted is known as the ATC, and then that's either ATC Sport is that first one. So I think you can see my mouse, right? ATC Sport right there. This is the ATC XP, and that's the ATC Guide. They all have their different uses and different advantages. I do have the ATC XP and Guide with me here. So really the only difference between these, and as you can see in the picture, is that they both have teeth. So that teeth provides friction when the rope's running through it. It's just that the ATC Guide has this hole in the back. And that's got just different applications. It allows you to put it into a different mode that secures the rope for when a climber is climbing up to you. So when you're on top of the route, this gives you a little bit more security. But for the most part, the way any device is really going to work is you're going to have the device attached to a carabiner. And then in this case, for this tube style device, the rope goes into the ATC, around the carabiner. So it's also secured to the carabiner, and then out the other side of the device. So it's running in 2 spots in the device. If I attach this to a harness, just like this, like I said, I'm not going to show you how to belay, but I'll just show you how it works rather. If the brake hand is pulling this down and running the rope over this teeth, that provides quite a lot of friction. So I can just kind of hold this down with somewhat of a free hand. And if I pull up on the rope, there's nothing moving through. If I loosen that grip a little bit, then it moves through a little bit. And this hand barely has to, put a lot of that force in. Like I don't feel the full weight of someone's body on this hand. It's just a mere fraction of it. And that's the goal of all of these devices is, not have like a full body weight on your hand, basically. So these tube style devices are relying largely on just the friction provided by the device. But if I did let go, then the rope would go launching through and they'd still fall at a very fast rate. So, again, with any of these devices, anything that you're using to belay, you're always keeping your hand on no matter what. That's just like the golden rule, basically. So yeah, that's going to be your tube style. There's a lot of different colors in there. There's a lot of different looks to them, but those are all basically just rope goes into a hole, wraps around a carabiner, comes on out, and that's what you end up with. Now, before I get into assisted braking, I want to talk real quick about kind of an older style device that's primarily used for rappelling, descending down, but it can be used as well for belaying. And that's going to be your 8s. So these came before any of these belay devices. These are more used for canyoneering, kind of lowering things down. But again, like I said, they can be used in quite a similar way. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say this is a tube style device. I would say this is an 8 style device. But they, again, work pretty similarly. So if I take my rope and I stick it through the small hole and a little bite like that, and then just throw a carabiner on here, it's going to do the same type of thing, just with a little bit less friction for sure. So if I have the rope coming up and I pull this rope down, the friction of the rope getting pinched in this hole and kind of rubbing against that metal is going to do the same thing. And if I pull up, I don't really have to hold on super hard with this hand. And if I, give up a little bit, it's going to let the rope run through. Same concept. It just doesn't have teeth, and it's not necessarily like tube style. A little earlier gen, but it's, it's just a chunk of metal. It's easy to use, has a lot of different uses, and yeah, it was kind of something simple before they started coming out with these advanced designs when we had better machining options, that sort of thing. Yeah, now we'll talk about the assisted braking. So unfortunately, I do not have an example of a mechanically braked device, but we'll still talk about them and go over them. But I do have one for the passive, right? So when you can kind of see by looking at these two categories here, assisted braking and for passive and active, and kind of see the differences somewhat immediately. In the middle there with that passive, everything's one piece. There's no moving parts. There might be like different components that are there just for color or for stability, whatever. But overall, that's just going to be for the most part, a tube style thing that moves around in such a way that it pinches the rope against the carabiner usually. So I have one right here. So this is actually both a tube style and a passive assisted braking. If you look at that second row there, so where these green devices are, this is more just a company specific thing, but basically they allow you to choose to have tube style unassisted or assisted braking passive, depending on which way you turn the device, right? So what you do is I'll just load the device, and it works pretty much the same way. You just kind of put a bite of the rope into the device. It runs around the carabiner, so that way it's still secured to something, and then you get working from there. Now what's going on here is that when the rope pulls, it forces this carabiner to move closer to this slot right here. And when the carabiner goes into that slot, it wants to press up against the rope that's kind of running into there. So by forcing that carabiner to kind of smash against the rope there, it provides a little bit of extra friction, so you don't have to hold onto the rope as hard. And in some cases, if you get the right kind of diameter, you might actually not really have to hold anything. You're still holding onto the rope, but it's taking all the weight off of your hand. So to kind of show what that looks like, I guess I'll pull that down. Yeah, so if someone takes a fall or there's some sort of weight put on this, it's going to not really visibly do anything special. It's just going to kind of move. But while still holding onto this hand, you can see that even though I'm pulling on this, it's still holding the rope. This side's slack. And that, that's what it does. It has its own ways of releasing it. Any of these devices are going to have a way of, slowly releasing that load, so that way you can move out of having the device locked up. And that's why it can work as a belay device. If it does lock up, you still want to have that option to go ahead and lower someone down. So yeah, all those devices are going to kind of do that thing. You might notice that they all have some sort of like hook or a loop or a thumb thing. That's to go ahead and unload it. So with this device, it's this this big thumb loop right here. So when it's loaded, you kind of stick your thumb in and just tilt it up a little bit, and that unlocks the device. So yeah, what's going on with basically every single device in the middle there. You just got that little thumb loop, and you kind of press it up, and goes from there. Now moving on to the assisted braking mechanical options. These are going to have moving parts. I think basically every single design there has just a camming unit. So a cam, really what that is just a piece of metal on a hinge that's kind of got like a complex, somewhat circular shape to it, such that when it rotates, it pushes the same force and the same angle onto an object. So if you look at the first like row there, it's called the grigri. Grigri is probably the most famous mechanically, operated assisted braking device. And what it does is when the rope loads, it forces that hinge, that cam, to go ahead and move up, and then as it tilts upwards, where the rope's coming out of the tip point, so that front, I guess, top part of the device, that's where the rope's coming out of into the brake hand. It's going to cause the cam to pinch that part of the rope. So really, the more the device is loaded, and the more suddenly it's loaded, the harder it cams and the harder it grabs onto the rope. These are typically more secure than passive ropes. They're a little bit less finicky. With the passive devices, you really have to have like the right carabiner. You have to consider what device you're using. You have to have the right diameter of rope. Is the rope slick? What material is it made out of? All that stuff really plays a big part in whether or not that grabs, better or worse. Whereas with these active assisted braking devices, for the most part, as long as you're within the acceptable rope diameters, which could be pretty big, I think with a grigri is between 8 and 11 millimeters. As long as you're in that range, then it pretty much just works, and it works really well. So a good bit less finicky, and that's largely an attribute to the fact that it has that hinge that can move at different angles and kind of grab harder or less hard depending on that rope diameter. So yeah, all these things are really options, right? So why would we at this point use an unassisted thing when we have all these options that help us hold on to the rope anyways, right? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. So you might go to an unassisted device because it's a lot easier to learn on. It's a lot easier to use. You learn basic belay technique and have to rely on basic belay technique when you're learning on an unassisted device. So it makes it a lot simpler for a beginner to use. And I mean, besides that, they weigh less, they are cheaper, and they're more versatile. So you'll note with basically every single option that's assisted braking, I guess except for those middle ones there by Edelred, those jewel pieces, all of these devices are going to have one hole, one entry point, so only one rope can go through it, right? Now, we'll probably end up talking about this at some other point in the semester, but when you repel, you almost 9 times out of 10 have 2 ropes running down, so the rope goes up, bends through a point, and then both ends are on the ground. When you repel, you can't repel on a single line. You're supposed to repel on both lines. So you can't really repel with basically any of those assisted braking devices unless you set up another system to where you can have a single rope for that one repel. So those unassisted belay devices really make that, that's kind of the go-to. That's what you're going to be using for the most part. And also besides that, when you're using an active or an assisted braking device, you have to really understand a lot more besides just the belaying part. You have to understand how the device works. You have to understand, what kind of little, I guess, like personality traits they have. Some of them grab a little bit harder. Some of them are, they grab too hard. Some of them might be a little finicky on the loosening. You might have to really balance what you're holding in your hand versus what you're releasing with your other hand. They can be just kind of a weird balance to find. Whereas with the unassisted braking devices, you just brake and then kind of loosen your grip a little bit and they just work. Just a lot more simple. Now, that being said, of course, the assisted braking component, the actual ability for the device to maybe hold on is quite nice. If you're outside and then some freak accident occurs where someone's belaying and they fall and then there's rock fall and then, God forbid that the rock hits you in the head or something and you get knocked out, right? And you let go of the brake hand, that adds an extra component of security. There's that chance that the device will actually go ahead and hold onto the rope even though you're not holding onto it. So if you, get knocked out or trip over or something like freak accident happens. So that's a nice peace of mind to have. That's a nice piece of security, just in case things go wrong. And for that beginner component, there is also the argument that as a beginner, it might be nice to have that device hold onto the rope in case you make a mistake and let go of the rope. But to be honest, you really shouldn't be using any of those assisted braking devices until you have, a solid belay technique and you understand how to belay, so that way you don't get in that situation where you're letting go and, kind of without some sort of freak accident, just putting yourself in a precarious scenario where you're letting go of the rope. So yeah, that's really a bit about the entire, just all this stuff with belay devices. So I just have one piece of addendum here. So this is just common grounds between all the devices. I've gone over a lot of these, honestly. So I just want to go ahead and tell you that all belay devices are intended to assist a belayer in halting a rope movement, right? These are tools that want to help us out if we use them correctly. So just remember that you're trying to, these things are trying to help you hold on to a rope, basically. That's really all this is about holding onto a rope and securing the rope and giving slow, controlled movement of the rope when you want it, where you want it. All belay devices also require a constant and firm grip on the brake strand. I've been saying that over and over, saying don't let go of the brake hand, all that stuff. A lot of devices, they may say assisted braking or really good braking, or you might even hear some people throw around the term auto locking. That's not really a true thing. You don't want to listen to that. Whatever belay device you're using for whatever thing you're using, you want to have a constant and firm brake hand on there, right? That's ground zero, rule number one. No matter what you hear, whenever you do learn how to belay, you're going to hear that again. That's just a thing to keep in mind. Even though there are assisted braking devices, you are not supposed to let go of the brake strand, even though they help you out, right? So just wanted to throw that in there. That's a great piece of information to remember. And the last two things I have here is that all belay devices have a set of pros and cons that should be considered before use. So like I said, you can get a cheap device that's not assisted braking and it's easy to learn on, or you can get something a little bit more expensive but maybe more secure, but there's a lot more of a learning curve. There's things that can go wrong if you have some sort of error in use. And then with any belay device, even for the unassisted ones, of course, you want to make sure that you have a mastery of the functionality before you go out and use it on your own, right? So take a belay class, read the manuals for these things if you end up buying your own devices. Ask a friend who's used the device before. Just do anything you can to completely understand everything about that device before you just go jump out into the woods and start belaying someone with some chunk of metal. Those are just the biggest common grounds and pieces of advice that I could give for any of these belay devices. So yeah, I do believe that concludes the presentation for today. Brooke, you're the only one here, so do you have any questions at all? Looks like we're hanging easy, all right? So yeah, again, we will have another session next week on Tuesday. It's going to be at 12 o'clock again. I hope you can, watch all the rest of these episodes if you haven't already that are up. So just go ahead and take a look at those other things. Especially, I highly, highly recommend the climbing terminology. I think it was a Friday night climb at that point. Go ahead and watch that climbing terminology one, because I do explain terms as I go, but if there's any terms that get thrown around here and there, that one's definitely going to help you out and kind of keep you in the lingo. So, yeah. Thanks for watching. To press the stop recording button.